In 1996, in a quiet town near rural Ohio, a woman named Evelyn Carter appeared to be everything people admired. She volunteered at church, ran a small charity for struggling families, and was often seen comforting others during difficult times. To the outside world, she was kindness in human form. But behind closed doors, Evelyn lived a secret life that no one imagined, a life built on lies, control, and emotional imprisonment. Evelyn had grown up poor. Her childhood was marked by neglect, instability, and an overwhelming desire to never feel powerless again. As she grew older, that desire twisted into a need to control others. She didn't seek money at first. She sought loyalty, dependency, and obedience. She wanted people to need her so completely that they could never leave. Her first target was a young woman named Melissa Harper, a 17-year-old runaway who arrived in town after fleeing an abusive home. Melissa was scared, broke, and alone. When Evelyn found her crying behind a grocery store, she didn't hesitate to act. She offered food, a place to sleep, and protection. To Melissa, Evelyn felt like salvation. Evelyn took Melissa into her home, gave her clothes, meals, and what appeared to be motherly care. She told Melissa that the world was dangerous and cruel, and that only she could keep her safe. Slowly, Evelyn began isolating Melissa from others, discouraging friendships, intercepting phone calls, and convincing her that no one else could be trusted. At first, the control was subtle. Evelyn insisted on knowing where Melissa was at all times. Then she restricted her movements. Eventually, she forbade her from leaving the house without permission. Melissa, emotionally exhausted and deeply dependent, believed Evelyn's lies. She believed that Evelyn was her protector. Over time, Evelyn began bringing other vulnerable people into her home. She targeted individuals who were homeless, mentally fragile, undocumented, or escaping abusive situations. Each time, she played the role of savior. Each time, she slowly transformed into a jailer. By 1999, 5 adults were living in Evelyn's house. They had no access to phones, no control over their finances, and no freedom to leave. Evelyn controlled their food, their schedules, and their communication. She convinced them that the outside world was dangerous and that if they left, they would be harmed, arrested, or killed. Evelyn used emotional manipulation rather than physical chains. She punished disobedience with isolation, starvation, and psychological abuse. She rewarded loyalty with praise, food, and affection. Over time, her victims lost their sense of identity. They no longer trusted their own judgment. They only trusted Evelyn. One of her victims, a man named Thomas Reed, had been a war veteran struggling with PTSD. Evelyn found him living in his car behind a shopping mall. She offered him shelter and promised to help him rebuild his life. But once inside her home, Thomas became just another prisoner. Thomas tried to leave several times. Each time, Evelyn convinced him that he was unstable, dangerous to himself, and incapable of surviving alone. She told him that the police were watching him and that if he stepped outside, he would be arrested or institutionalized. Terrified and confused, Thomas stayed. Evelyn maintained her public image carefully. She continued volunteering, donating to charities, and presenting herself as a pillar of the community. Neighbors admired her generosity. Some even praised her for taking in troubled people. No one suspected that her home was a prison. In 2002, a young woman named Rachel Lopez became Evelyn's most emotionally dependent victim. Rachel had fled domestic violence and was pregnant when Evelyn found her. Evelyn promised to protect her and her unborn child. She attended doctor appointments with Rachel, controlled her diet, and even chose the baby's name. When Rachel gave birth, Evelyn took full control of the child's life. She convinced Rachel that she was unfit to be a mother, that the baby would die without Evelyn's guidance. Slowly, Rachel was pushed into the role of caretaker rather than mother. The baby, named Lucas, became Evelyn's emotional leverage. Evelyn used Lucas as a tool to maintain control. She threatened to report Rachel to child services if she disobeyed. She told her that only Evelyn could provide a safe home. Rachel lived in constant fear of losing her child. That fear kept her trapped. Over time, Evelyn expanded her control beyond her house. She began manipulating local shelters and charities, redirecting vulnerable individuals to her home under the guise of assistance. She forged documents, intercepted mail, and controlled financial aid meant for her victims. By 2005, 9 adults and 1 child lived under Evelyn's rule. None of them had access to personal identification, money, or outside communication. Their lives revolved entirely around Evelyn's approval. Despite her careful control, cracks began to form. One victim, an older woman named Dorothy Mills, had lived under Evelyn's control for nearly 4 years. Unlike the others, Dorothy retained a quiet inner resistance. She observed Evelyn's patterns, memorized her routines, and waited for a moment of opportunity. That moment came when Evelyn fell ill and was hospitalized for 3 days. During that time, Dorothy managed to secretly contact a former neighbor through a borrowed phone. She whispered, "We're trapped. Please help us." The neighbor, confused but alarmed, contacted local authorities. At first, police were skeptical. Evelyn had a spotless reputation. But when Dorothy managed to leave the house during Evelyn's hospitalization and walked into a police station, the truth began to unfold. Dorothy appeared malnourished, emotionally distressed, and terrified. She told officers about the others still trapped inside Evelyn's home. She described years of psychological abuse, isolation, and control. Investigators launched a welfare check on Evelyn's house. When police entered the home, they found conditions that shocked them. Several adults were locked in bedrooms, malnourished and emotionally broken. Some were so conditioned that they refused to leave, begging officers to let them stay with Evelyn. Rachel was found holding her child, crying uncontrollably. She believed that if Evelyn returned, she would be punished or lose her son. Thomas was found sitting in a dark room, rocking back and forth, repeating that he wasn't allowed to leave. Evelyn was arrested upon her release from the hospital. She denied all accusations and insisted that she was merely helping people who couldn't help themselves. She claimed they were mentally ill, unstable, and dangerous to society. She described herself as their only protection. The case quickly gained national attention. Prosecutors charged Evelyn with unlawful imprisonment, emotional abuse, financial exploitation, and child endangerment. Psychologists testified that Evelyn exhibited traits consistent with coercive control, narcissistic personality disorder, and extreme manipulation. During the trial, survivors testified one by one. Melissa described how she had lost her youth, education, and identity under Evelyn's control. Thomas described how he had nearly taken his own life believing Evelyn's lies. Rachel described living in constant terror of losing her child. Evelyn showed no remorse. She insisted she was misunderstood. She claimed that her victims were exaggerating and mentally unstable. She described herself as a martyr who had sacrificed her life to care for broken people. The jury found Evelyn guilty on all counts. In 2007, she was sentenced to 42 years in prison. The survivors faced a long road to recovery. Years of psychological imprisonment had left deep scars. Many struggled with basic decision-making, trust, and independence. Some required years of therapy to regain a sense of self. Melissa returned to school and became a social worker, helping others escape abusive environments. Thomas found support through veteran services and eventually started speaking publicly about coercive control. Rachel regained custody of her child and rebuilt her life through counseling and community support. Lucas, the child who had been used as leverage, grew up surrounded by love and safety, far from Evelyn's shadow. This case became a landmark example of how abuse doesn't always involve chains or bruises. Sometimes the most powerful prisons are built with words, fear, and emotional manipulation. Evelyn's victims were not physically restrained, they were psychologically trapped. Experts now use this case to teach law enforcement, social workers, and communities about coercive control, a form of abuse that thrives in silence and invisibility. The town that once admired Evelyn now remembers her as a warning, a reminder that kindness can be weaponized, that trust can be exploited, and that evil does not always look monstrous. Sometimes it looks like a smiling woman offering help. And for the survivors, their freedom, though delayed, became their greatest victory. Their voices, once silenced, now stand as proof that even the deepest psychological prisons can be escaped.